In class. This video is for Microsoft Access Unit J. Covers on how to create a database. The objectives of this unit are to understand databases, to create a database, create a table in Datasheet view. We're also going to create a table in Design view. We're going to modify a table and set properties, enter data in a table, edit data in Datasheet view, and create and use a form. So before we get into Microsoft Access, we need to understand a little bit about databases. Microsoft Access is what I like to call a desktop database. It's a database that's used primarily in small business or small organization applications. That's not a large scalable type database like Oracle or some of the more popular database applications are considered to be. So it's more than likely you're going to see it, if you do see it in your professional career, in a setting quite kind of like that, small, not a large implementation of Microsoft Access. But Access is known as a database management system, or a DBMS. If you are a computer science major or maybe an MIS major, you will see that term a lot if you choose to go into a concentration that includes database theory. But a database is a powerful tool for storing, organizing, and retrieving information, and it consists of or a database that just consists of one table is called a simple database, and a database that has two or more tables of related information is called a relational database. Okay, so understanding database is just a little more information. Database stores data in a spreadsheet-like form or a list called a table. I'll show you an example of one of those in just a minute. But it does look similar to a table that you would have seen in Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word. Each row in a table is called a record, and that record contains fields of data which hold one aspect about a record, and the records have information that is related in some form. And a form is a user-friendly window that is used to input data. This is something that you have seen before, probably on a web page. If you've ever had to input your name, email address, for example, if you've ordered something online, there's a form that will pop up and you'll have to input information. That's an example of a form, and we can also create those in Microsoft Access to input data. Okay, so databases are powerful for many reasons, but one of the most convenient and powerful things about a database is that you can query data. So a query extracts data from one or more database tables according to a set criteria. It's kind of like running a search, like a Google search. Can be considered a type of query. If you've ever gone to the library and searched for a book using a set of criteria, that would be a query. So, and that's one of the main advantages to using a database. Another object that is found in Microsoft Access is a report, and it's a summary of information pulled from the database specifically designed for printing. So for example, if you needed to run a query on, let's say, all of the members that resided in Tuscaloosa County that were a part of the Alumni Association, you could run a query against the database that contained that information, and once you get your query results, you could format it in a report specifically for printing, maybe for distribution to the faculty or administration. So that's an example of what a report is. There's some other types of objects in Access. Those are called tables, forms, queries, reports. All those are considered to be objects. All of those can be created and saved in your database, and you can access them over and over. You can tweak them or modify them as needed to meet your needs. But those are considered objects, and that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. Alright, and this is table J1. I've got it included in this PowerPoint presentation just to give a little more detail on those objects. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can read. Alright, so the table, as we touched on earlier, is a list of organized data in rows called records and columns, fields, and I'll give an example of that in just a minute. A query is a set of criteria you specify to retrieve data from a database, and it will return the results that you're looking for. A form is a window that lets you view, enter, and edit data in a database one record at a time, and then a report is a summary of database information designed specifically for distributing or printing. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a Microsoft Access. This again, I'm using Microsoft Office 2007, so 2013 looks a little different, but primarily it's the same application for the most part. So this is a table to the right side of the screen. This area of the screen contains my table. The pane on the left hand side is called the navigation pane. You can see I have other tables available to look at. The one we're currently looking at is realty companies. I've got another table that's named houses, and we'll take a look at this one. It has more information. So a record would be one row of data, and as you can see, all this information is related. So the address for this one house in particular on number 4 Street King, probably King Street, that may be input backwards, in the city Slip Puri, state of mind. The zip code is 05401. Person's last name is Pugh, first name is Wynn, that's their phone number, the price for the house, and this is a list of houses that are on the market. We have, looks like 2 baths, 4 bedrooms, and the list date was 12/25/2001, and we have a realtor ID. So all of that information on that one row is a record, and it's related. On the other hand, you have, so that's what a row would be consisted of, would be a record, or the columns are considered to be fields. So this is a field. This item here is data in a field. So the fields in this case, they contain the same information for different records. So the address, you're always going to find an address in that field. The city, you'll always find the city name in that field. The state, you will always find the state name in that field, and so forth and so on. So this is what a table looks like. This is a record, and this is a field. Okay. Alright, so let's flip back over to our presentation. Let's see. So moving on to how to create a database, there's 2 ways to create an Access database, and it's the same 2 options that we have to create a new document in Word, a new presentation in PowerPoint, a new spreadsheet or workbook or worksheet in Microsoft Excel. You can start from a blank database, or you can use a template. Depending on what your needs are, you can use one or the other. And as you may expect, creating a database from a template can save time, as it's ready-made. It's formatted in a professional way, and all you have to do really is to provide the data. And when you begin Access, from the first time the start screen opens and displays a variety of templates you can use, just like the other Microsoft applications. Alright, so with the Access program ribbon open, below the ribbon button there are 2 panes, and I touched on this just a minute ago. The right pane in the situation where you have just opened Access will contain a blank table, data sheet with a temporary table name, and then the left pane is called the navigation pane, which I touched on that a minute ago. So the pane on the left is your navigation pane, and in this case the pane on the right is going to be your table pane. This is where your table is your table is located. Now if I was working with a form, then my pane to the right would display a form. So it's whatever the active object that you're working, it'll be displayed in this pane here on the right. Okay. Alright, let's see. Creating a new table in Datasheet view. Alright, so there's a couple ways you can create a table. One is in Datasheet view, which is this view here. This view to the right. I'll minimize my navigation pane and make it a little easier to see. This view is Datasheet view. It looks just like a spreadsheet for all intents and purposes. It works similar to a spreadsheet, not quite the same. You input data basically the same. You click in the cell, you can back out the data, you can type over data. So most of the text editing tricks are available to you. Or you can create a table in what we call design view, and you can access design view by clicking the icon, the view icon on the top left hand corner of the home tab. In this case, it looks like a pencil with a triangle ruler and a normal ruler, and it will take you to design view. Yes. Okay, so this is what design view is. Now, design view strictly deals with the structure of your table. As you can see, I've got all of the field names here: address, city, state, zip, last, first, phone number, price, bath, bedroom, list date, and realtor ID. And if I flip back to data sheet view, you can see those are my field names across the top. Okay, so design view not only allows you to add new columns or new fields to the database table and new records, it allows you to populate that data as well, where in design view you're merely working with the structure of the table. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit, what design view is doing for us. So if I wanted to create a table, probably the simplest way in my opinion would be in design view. I can type in my fields in the field name column, and then I can designate the data type in the right hand column. Now, what is a data type? Okay, for my computer science majors out there, some of you may know what a data type is, or if anyone else that has taken a computer science class or a programming class, you may know what a data type is. A data type is essentially telling the database telling its memory or its storage device, for the lack of a better word, what type of data this is that's about to be stored in this field. Is it going to be text only? Is it going to be numbers? Is it going to be a date and time? Is it going to have let's see, we'll look at the other options. Currency, you know, for money, formatting for money. Is it going to be an auto number, which all auto number is an automatic feature that automatically numbers the lines in the database. Is it a yes or no data type, which means you would in memory would only probably need one bit, a 1 or a 0, to indicate a yes or a no. A hyperlink, OLE object. There's different types of data types available to you, and what this does is it allows for more efficient use and effective use of memory. Some of your text data types, if you've heard of a long or short integer or a long or short text variable, those are data types in programming. What that does is reserves a block of memory for this particular piece of data, and if I only need a small block of memory for my data, then I don't want to reserve a large portion of memory for my block of data, because it's not efficient. It wastes memory. So that's one of the things a data type does for you. Another thing it does is certain data types have certain features available to them. For example, numbers. Numbers can be included in calculations, as where text would not be included in a calculation. So let's say, for example, I wanted to, let's say, calculate the average of all the houses on the market in our table. I could do that since all of the prices are listed as numbers. Now, would I want to perform a calculation on the phone number? Well, it's numbers. A telephone number is a string of numbers, but it has no value to us if used in any type of calculation. So that's one of the differences. It's some of the features and functions that are available to that data type, and it's also to designate how much memory is needed to store that data. So that's what a data type is. Okay, so this is design view. Let's see, we also have some other features at the bottom. For this particular field, for address, we can give it a field size of 20. We can, for our data validation, which we'll talk a little bit about later, we can make the field required or not. So if we enter a new record, we'll make the database will make the user input a an address if this field is required, which we've got it set to no here. Allowed zero length, which means no, which means we can't have a length of 0 or no input in that cell. Let's see, and there's some other features. One of the more important fields in the field properties is the caption. This is where we can place a note. If we create a database, we always want, or any program for that matter, you always want to provide as many notes as possible for the people that come behind you and work on the database at a later date. For example, if I was to put a field name in my database that could be misinterpreted somehow, I would want to have a caption with comments indicating exactly what that field's purpose is. Okay, so that's just another field property, point to note here is that's what caption is used for. Input mask we'll get into a little bit later, but that basically that formats the input into the table. For example, you can see if I wanted to make my input formatted as a phone number, we could just type in the digits and it would format it as a phone number for us. Social Security, it would take the 9-digit input and break it up into the 3 digits, a dash, 2 digits, a dash, and then 4 digits. So that's what an input mask is. It formats the input based on parameters that we give it. Okay. All right, let's see. Look at the rest of these bullet points. So we created a table in datasheet view. You always want to save your table, and this last bullet point is very important. Each object within an Access database that you create will need to be saved. I can't stress it enough. Save early and often. And what that means is if I'm working with in this case our houses table, and I make a change, well, I'll need to save every time I want to move on. So what does that mean? Anytime that I leave this table, let's say I go to the friends table, or if I want to close or excuse me, not close, but create a form or a query on that table, I will have to save that data. So each individual object in Access, and objects are tables, forms, queries, which we don't have any listed here, and reports. All of those you need to think of as a separate object included inside of Access. So make sure that you save every time you make changes. Very important. You'll probably get asked on more than one occasion when you're working with Access, do you want to save if you switch between tables, or if you switch between forms or queries or whatever type of object that you're working on. Very important. It's a little bit more redundant than most applications, which is why I point that out. Alright, so just a little bit more on the table, creating a table in datasheet view. To add a field to a table, you need to specify its data type, which we touched on a little bit, such as date, currency, and then specify a name. Every table and database must contain a field that is designated as a primary key, which uniquely identifies each record among all other records in the database. And then by default, every blank new table in Access includes a blank ID field, which is automatically designated as the primary key. Alright, so what is the primary key? Primary key in general is a unique identifier. For example, and when I mean by a unique identifier, I mean that if you pull up a record in a database using that unique identifier, there is absolutely no chance whatsoever that you'll have more than one record, or that it'll relate to more than one person. An example of this would be a Social Security number. Everybody has their own Social Security number, and there's no such thing as a duplicate Social Security number. That's an example of a unique identifier. Your S number for Shelton State students and faculty Everyone has an S number, and that S number identifies that faculty member or that student. There's no duplicate. So that's what a unique identifier is. And to keep the integrity and data of any database accurate, you have to have what we call unique identifiers, or in this case the same thing as a primary key. So each table should have a primary key. Okay, so in this example you can see I'm looking at the friends table in design view, and the friends field name, as you can see, this field is part of the table's primary key. So for this table, the primary key is the friends ID. Okay, it has a data type of auto number, which really the data type isn't relevant as much as the fact that this field name has just been designated as the primary key, which means there can be any duplicates. That friends ID will uniquely identify any record or friend in this case without any duplication. So that's what a primary key is. And the further you get into databases and database theory, the more it'll make sense. But for now, we're going to settle on primary key is a unique identifier that relates to only one record. Okay. Alright, so we're going to move on. I'm not going to read this to you, but table J2, which is in you can find in your textbook, includes common field data types. Most of these we've already touched on. Short text and long text is a little bit I mentioned earlier about they're just similar data types, but one reserves more memory than the other. You have auto number, currency, date and time, yes, no, and then a calculated field. So we've talked about most of those already, but this is found in your book in Unit J. Alright, so creating a table in Design View. It's often easy to add fields to a new or existing table using Design View. Kind of touched on that earlier. It's my preference to use Design View because you can go ahead and set the structure of the table, and then you can use Datasheet View to populate data, or you can import data however you see fit. You can use Design View to specify data field types. We touched on that a little bit already. And then you can add the field descriptions, which those are the captions like that I mentioned earlier. And if nothing else, it might be able to help the next user or programmer or person that is tweaking your database later on to understand exactly what the purpose of that field is for. That's one of the main reasons you're going to use a caption. Excuse me. Okay, and then last bullet point, the Design View can be used to view and change the designated primary key. So that's where you would establish the primary key for the table would be in Design View. Okay. Let's see. So modifying a table and setting properties. After creating a table, you may need to make changes to it, such as adding, deleting field descriptions, or renaming a field. And again, Design View is the best place for modifying the table structure. So that's what we would recommend. And Design View can set field properties like we already touched on. And those field properties are data characteristics that dictate how Access stores, handles, and displays field data. So just reinforcing those points. Just to further elaborate on how to modify a table and its properties. If a field name is long, technical, or uses abbreviations, you may want to change its caption property. For example, I work in a very technical industry, and there are a lot of acronyms that we use, a lot of very technical terms that someone outside the industry probably would not understand. So in cases like that, a caption would be good to explain what those technical terms mean. And you'll find as you get into your career, particularly if you're either on the business side, operations side, or on, say, an IT side, that there's often a disconnect between the business unit and the IT support group that supports that business unit. And what I mean is, if the IT, let's say programmers, don't understand the technical specifics of the business unit, then it may be hard for the IT to develop applications or databases that have real value to the business unit. They may not be able to understand or comprehend what the business unit needs exactly. So you'll see that from time to time, that they have trouble designing an effective application because they don't quite understand the business. And it's not necessarily their fault, because they're programmers, or they're part of the IT organization. They're not trained to understand the business unit's specifics, but that's sometimes you'll see a disconnect between the two, and you have a intermediary or someone that kind of has to bridge the gap in those situations, which coincidentally is how the MIS curriculum program has come about. They kind of bridge the gap between the two. They take technology to solve business problems. So that's just some gee whiz information there. Okay, let's see. Entering data in a table is just like you would enter data into a spreadsheet. You just click where you want to click, type the data, and you can press enter. You can press tab. You can arrow over. However you wish to input the data. As we touched on earlier, each row of the table is one record. A row selector to the left of each record lets you select a record or a set of records, and we'll demonstrate that. So if I want to select a record, the row selector is the black arrow. I would click once, and I've got that row selected. If I wanted to select a range of rows, I could hold down the shift key, click the first row that I want to select and the last row that I want to select, and now I've got all of those records are selected. Okay, and you can do the same thing with columns. You have a field selector. I've selected one field, and I can select a range of fields, holding down the shift key and clicking again. Very similar to Microsoft Excel. Okay. All right, so looking at entering data in datasheet view, very similar to how you would enter data in a table in Word or in a spreadsheet in Excel. Should be able to use the same editing skills in Access as well. But one thing to point out is that data is constantly changing. So datasheet view the data should change more than likely, unless it's a database kept for historical purposes. If it's a database that manages current data, you may have a need to delete records. You may have a need to add records. You may have values that change within the database. For example, our database that we're working with includes records that have prices of houses that are on the market. Well, if those houses don't sell, sometimes the owner is willing to reduce the price and get the house sold. Well, that would be an example of data that might change week over week, or maybe a month, every other month. You may have some type of situation where the data would change. So just keep that in mind, that when you're dealing with a database, the data in that database can change and can be considered dynamic. In some situations, other situations, it could be considered static, and yet that's usually in for historical purposes, where that data really doesn't change. It's just reference data. Okay, again, we've touched on how to edit a field value. You would just select the field, double click the value, type over it, reword it, whatever you would wish, however you wish to change the data that you're working with. You can also resize columns and rows like you can in Excel, in Microsoft Access. Just use the row selector in between, or actually the double arrow in between the two rows, to increase the size of the row, and the same thing with the columns. You can select those and adjust the column and row size as accordingly. Okay. Alright, printing objects in Access. So when you want to print information in Access, you'll usually create a report that includes selected fields, and that's because, you know, Access, the data that you're working with in most databases is raw. Databases are meant to store data, query data, update data, import, export data. They're not always meant to print data in a form that is suitable for printing. So access includes an object called a report, which you can format however you wish, and then you can link it to your tables or to your queries to print the data that you're looking for. Okay. And there may also be times when you want to print a data sheet. You can do that. You can sort the data sheet just like you can sort an Excel file, so that it's you know, it may be in the order or format that you want. But most people, when using Access, typically are going to use a report to print data. And just the last couple of bullet points here: to print any object in Access, you would select that object in the navigation pane, click File, and then click Print. So in this case, we've got the house, the houses table selected in the navigation pane. My version of Access has the window button, so I would click that instead of the File tab. I would click Print, and then it would give me some options. It would give me my printer name, pages, setup. If I want to format my file in a certain manner, and I would click OK to print. In this case, I'm not going to print, so I'm just going to cancel out. But that's how you would print an object in Access. You just make sure that object has to be selected, and you should be able to print as you would expect in any other Microsoft application. And our last slide, creating and using a form. So a form is an efficient way to enter and edit data. It's easier to use, and there are fewer data entry errors and less eye strain, which is primarily the reason to use a form. Most people will say, well, if I can type the data right into the form, or the data sheet, why would I want to use a form? Well, the reason is for data integrity. Okay, so this is what a form looks like. You know, this is we can scroll through the forms. You'll see there's the list of 1 through 26, which would indicate the number of records in the table that this form is linked to. If I wanted to add a new form, I could use new record, the new record button at the bottom of the page. But what this does is you can set some constraints here. You can set some input validation rules to make sure that the data that the user inputs is accurate data, that they don't give an address without a house number, or that they give a numeric value for the number of baths instead of, you know, maybe a typo. If we were going to include a phone number, we can make sure that it was a 10-digit phone number and not a 9-digit phone number where they accidentally left a digit out. Okay, so that's the reason for a form: input validation, and allows you to view a record one record at a time if you want that view to make things easier. So that's Unit J. I will post the next 2 units for Microsoft Access in the next day or so, so be looking for those. But if you have questions, please let me know through course messages, and if not, y'all have a good rest of the evening.